It's almost as if the stars have aligned once again. Before we suspend this podcast for a little Christmas break, we've got suspensions to talk about right here on the OHL podcast. Dan Mahar over there. Find him on Twitter at Dan Mahar. My name is Mike Farwell at Farwell underscore OHL. The unofficial first half, Dan, I guess, is in the books. And what a first half it's been. We touched on this last week, but just as a general observation, it's going to be a really interesting couple of weeks leading up to the trade deadline with the Christmas freeze in place, with the World Junior freeze in place. And by my count, at least a dozen teams that probably at least think they've got a shot at something here.
Yeah, what a bonus for the league, right? I mean, if you're running this league and you look around and you've got basically all 20 teams thinking they got a shot at the playoffs come the trade deadline, that's a good thing, I think. I mean, obviously some of them are going to sell because they're a little far from contention, but nevertheless, I don't remember a year like this, and that's a good thing.
I get the sense there will be more people looking to buy than there are people looking to sell, but general managers are going to be earning their keep over the next couple of weeks. We'll be talking about that as that January 10th trade deadline approaches. But right now, as I said, a couple of big suspensions to discuss in this week's episode before we take that Christmas break. And one of them, Dan, is to Greg Walters, the now former coach with the Owen Sound Attack. There were some questions raised. It seemed odd. He comes back from a relatively successful road trip up north. The team is 4-2-1. He's rather suddenly dismissed by the team. And in the reporting from Greg Cowan in the Owen Sound Sun Times, there was no indication, at least at the time of Walters's firing, that there was some sort of issue with the league or an investigation was underway. Instead, they just move on. Darren Rumble, the assistant and former OHLer, takes over as head coach. And then we just learned in the past week that the league has suspended Walters for the remainder of this season. So let's call it 35, 40 games, whatever you want to call it. He can apply for reinstatement in writing at the end of the season following the Memorial Cup in June. I'll just share with you some of the language in that release from the team and then throw it, or from the league, pardon me, and then throw it over to you, Dan, for thoughts. So it says the investigation found that Greg Walters failed to maintain an environment where all individuals are treated with respect and free from bullying, harassment, and abuse. And he also demonstrated a clear lack of commitment to safety of his players. What do you make of this?
Well, the first thing I make of is it's starting to make sense, right? When he was let go, nothing that was coming out at the time really made sense. You have a team that's 4-2, they're running pretty well, and why would you fire a coach 6, 7 games into a season when things were looking pretty good on this vague statement about not playing the way they had discussed in the summer? So we knew something more was to that, and here we go. But all that language, Mike suggests, obviously, lost his cool, did something, said something, um, just behaved in a way that is no longer appropriate. And I know maybe it's a personality trait that some of these people in the hockey world just cannot temper. But you're going to have to. I mean, we have so much evidence this day and age of this behavior not being okay. People have ample warning of what you can and cannot do. And if you have the instincts to do those things, then you need to do more work than the rest of us. But to let yourself still fall victim to your own temper or your own rage, or who knows what exactly happened here, but it sounds like whatever it was crossed some severe lines, and he's paying the price.
Yeah, so I'm feeling similarly, but I think I have a position here that may not be universally popular. However, let me spell it out this way or explain it as best I can. So here's what I'm taking away from what we learned from the league that they've shared with regard to the investigation. First of all, demonstrated a clear lack of commitment to the safety of his players. That to me is one of the most important elements of this. If you're not showing some sort of respect for the safety of your players, then there's no business for you in this league anywhere, quite frankly. That should be job number one. I think the league has been consistent on that. I think I've been consistent in saying I appreciate and admire the league's consistency on that front. And so that we have to make sure maintains a key priority of the league and everybody associated with it, the safety and overall health and well-being of the players. But here's one of the things I'm reading into here. That was the secondary part of the league's release, which suggests to me that this issue, whatever it was, had more to do with that failure, again, from the language of the league's release, to maintain this environment where all individuals are treated with respect and free from bullying, harassment, and abuse. Now, I understand where you're coming from, and I take what you say, Dan, sincerely, and I understand that absolutely this is kind of where we're at in the world today. And yes, if you struggle to maintain a level of composure, to temper your temper, if you will, there are far greater consequences for that than there ever used to be. And to a degree, I subscribe to that, but I will say only to a degree. I worry a little bit here, and this is how I'm going to describe it for you. Look, first of all, I know a number of people involved in the Owen Sound Attack organization. I know them pretty well, and I have the utmost respect for them. This was clearly an issue. The main part of this was an issue between Greg Walters, the head coach, and another staff member with the Owen Sound Attack. I wasn't there at that game in Sault Ste. Marie when this all came to a head. I suspect that this was loud enough for some fans not far from the bench to probably have an idea what was going on. As we've learned from the league, it was an official on the ice that reported this to the league and said something is probably not right here. So whatever transpired behind the bench, I don't know. But Greg Walters has been around this league for a fair number of years. There's no question that he's an older school kind of fiery coach. But here's where I'm at on this. I'm worried a little bit, Dan, that if we have arrived at a point in our existence as people, and specific to this case as competitors, where we can't have, for lack of a better term, an FU battle between one another, a little FU back and forth because we care that much about the job that we're doing, I'm not sure I'm okay with that. And I'll just put it there for your thoughts.
Yeah, and that's a fair point because you need some degree of latitude in these positions, right? To use different tactics, employ different tactics to get to the common goal you're all trying to achieve. I would just turn it around a bit though, Mike, here and say that whenever I think any of these organizations are concerned, wherever there's a power imbalance, and obviously you have Greg Walters at the top of the pyramid there, and you look at the incident happening in Sault Ste. Marie. So whomever it happened with has to ride that bus after the fact. And if you think that this incident caught the attention of an on-ice official and potentially fans and other people around, this is what's happening in the public eye. Imagine what might happen then once those doors close and they're on the trip back, and who knows, right? When people aren't watching. So I think that's, without knowing specific details of exactly what happened, I think that's what catches the league's attention, that they want to say, this is not okay behavior because we're not sure we can guarantee the safety of this particular employee or even your players or whomever. Whatever it was, obviously in many people's eyes, including the on-ice official, breached the line of just a heated exchange between two people looking to achieve the same thing, and abuse and potential abuse of power. So I'm going to trust that people know where that line is still, and that when it gets crossed is where we have an issue.
And so this is where I wouldn't mind even a little bit more information from the league so we know what the line was or is and where it was crossed. Obviously, you know, homophobic, misogynistic, sexist, racist language has zero place, and that's a non-starter. And I think we're all going to agree on that. But I want to share an example from my own professional life, and I want to be careful here to not try to conflate, competitive sports at a pretty damn high level with radio broadcasting at not as high a level. But I think there is a similarity here in that both industries are competitive industries. Whether you like radio broadcasting or not, my day job is to perform better than other people in my peer group so that my station has the most success. Just like a coach and everybody associated with a hockey team is trying to perform their best so that their team can perform the best, get the most points, win championships, etc. So I'm gonna, if you'll allow me, draw that comparison, if you will. So a long time ago, Dan, this may surprise you a little bit. I was a pretty stubborn guy. I had my share of opinions. I may still be a pretty stubborn guy with a pretty good share of opinions. I also think a few years ago, I took myself more seriously than I take myself today. We could argue that point probably, and feel free. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. If you want to tell me that I still take myself too seriously, that's fine. Here's the thing. I had just joined the radio station where I'm still working today, and it was an all news station, and I was coming from a news background but not an all news station. So I thought this was a pretty big feather in my cap. I'm going to do all news now. This is serious business. This is, you know, really one of the highest levels I could personally reach, at least in the market where I was working. And when I arrived, I ran into a boss, my direct report, who had a different idea of how we should be going about the business of broadcasting the news to our listeners. He was much more into the infotainment side of things, if you will. He liked the bells and whistles. And I'm like, listen, we're about meat and potatoes here, right? This is me now acknowledging taking myself really seriously. This should be about getting it right, telling the best story. It shouldn't be about, bells, whistles, sound effects, infotainment. I felt very strongly about this. And so we kind of clashed philosophically about how we should be best delivering our on-air product. And I hadn't been there all that long at the radio station where I'll remind you, I'm still employed today. When this came to a head, and it came to a head just before I went on the air for my afternoon shift, started at 3 o'clock, when he wanted our station to sound a certain way and lead with a certain story. And me, as the managing editor of that afternoon shift, completely disagreed with him. And I'm going to tell you that we were about this far apart from one another. And if you're not watching on YouTube, I'm just telling you that we're basically nose to nose in the hallway outside the studio doors before I'm supposed to be on the air in about 10 minutes in full view of the entire staff. And I'll tell you what, it was a two-floor radio station. I guarantee you they could hear us the floor below. We're upstairs going into the studios. We were top of our lungs yelling at one another. There was foul language. There was effing you and effing this and back and forth until we arrived at a point where I'm like, I need to take a breath. I left the radio station, went out onto the street, got some fresh air, came back in to start my shift. I mean, I had a co-anchor. She carried things like the champ that she was for about 10, 15 minutes at the start of the show. And I got into the flow, finished my shift, yada, yada, yada. She's like, I didn't think you were ever coming back. I thought you got fired on the spot, this and that. The end of the story is the next day, naturally, you might expect, I had to start the day with a meeting in my boss's office. And it was at that meeting, Dan, that we both acknowledged where we went wrong the day before, recognized that, hey, we've got some different philosophies here, and we're going to have to figure out. We both wanted the same thing. We wanted what's best for the station, just like I'm sure Greg Walters and this other Owen Sound Attack employee want what's best for the players and what's best for the team and what's going to generate the most success. Me and my boss sat down, we hashed it out, we shook hands, we promised to do better. And if ever we have to do this again, we'll take it behind closed doors and turn down the volume a little bit. And that was it. I kept my job. He eventually moved on to another job where he hired me again at another place down the road. And we remain to this day really good friends in the business. Now, I don't know if that comparison to radio broadcasting and high level competitive hockey flies with everybody here, but my point is this. I think I want it to still be okay. I'm just going to be blunt. I want it to still be okay to get into a little FU with somebody because your common goal is the same and not have it be the end of your career. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I think that depending on the nature of your relationship, obviously there was some healthy level of mutual respect before that argument occurred. That helped. That's not always the case. And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast might say, yeah, we're getting soft. Every one of us has had our butt kicked by a boss at some point or had a falling out with a coach or whatnot. And you shake hands, you have a beer, whatever, you go back to the drawing board. And I think that dynamic flies with a lot of us. We say, yeah, that's just kind of how things shake out as long as lines aren't crossed. But I think at the same time, we also have to acknowledge that the world has changed. And now all of these organizations, whether you're the radio station, a hockey organization, whatever, we all have various performance management tactics at our disposal, tools and tactics at our disposal. We have ways to address workplace issues like that without crossing any lines. And you know what? That puts limitations on abuses of power from above. And it puts, pretty strict terms on insubordination and things from below. So it maintains that level of respect because no one wants to be embarrassed in front of coworkers or colleagues. No one needs to be made to feel lesser than they are for any reason. And that's kind of the dynamic we're working with now. So I think things across the world have changed. And if that's a softening, sure, maybe it is a little softer, but I think I'd rather err on the side of a world where everyone gets treated with respect and dealt with respect, regardless of if they screwed up or not, uh, than having these complete blowouts where some people have no standing in that blowout.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't want to see the blowouts happening frequently. But gosh, I think a little friction in pursuit of a common goal is okay, and I want it to still be okay. Frankly, I grew from it, and I can tell you that in the 15 or so years since, have we had disagreements, sometimes passionate disagreements behind closed doors? Hell yes, we have. So there was certainly a lesson learned. And yeah, do we, tone down the language a little bit? Sure. But again, it came from, he knew where I was coming from. I knew where he was coming from. And I don't know. I do worry a little bit, Dan. I think it might be just a wee bit on erring on the soft side here. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm okay with that. If we are not motivated to compete and to put out there our very best in pursuit of that common goal, damn it, I don't know how I feel about it. And so I'll just finish. I think it's telling that Greg Walters can apply for reinstatement, which I suspect he will, and I suspect we'll see Greg Walters coaching in the league. So to your point, we're in a different place, but this is not the end of Greg Walters's coaching career in major junior, in my opinion. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you know what? I kind of chuckle a little at this whole thing anyway, because if you look at the way some of these coaches speak to the officials, and you think, well, they're not exactly extending respect in the workplace to these guys; they're embarrassing them in front of peers and colleagues. So, to me, it just comes back to that power imbalance thing. An official has some means to still wield power in that relationship, whereas presumably this person did not, and that's what catches everyone's attention.
Yeah, it would be interesting to learn more. And I guess I kind of understand why you don't get all of the sordid details, but it does make me just question a little bit where we're at. I think we know, and Sawyer Boulton and the London Knights know where he is at, a 10-game suspension for, oh, let's call it what it is, a hit pretty much directly to the head of Sault Ste. Marie captain Bryce McConnell Barker. McConnell Barker hasn't played since, and Bolton gets himself a 10-game ban. What say you, Dan?
It was a rough week for the McConnell Barker boys. His younger brother took a nasty hit in Guelph as well. So yeah, I mean, basically my stance on this one's pretty straightforward. I hate seeing those shots. Those obviously the league wants to get rid of the shots to the head. This one was borderline late, as we could all see from the video. And probably the thing, I'm just going to be honest, that doesn't sit well with me the most is the fact that Sawyer Bolton is there to play that physical game, that intimidating game, not necessarily a high end OHL caliber talent, taking out a high end OHL caliber talent with a questionable hit. So I think based on that framing, I have a problem with it. No one, the league or fans or anyone else wants to see high skilled players taken out of the game by lower skilled players who are there to try and do that. So I don't think the optics sat well here, and being Sawyer Bolton's third suspension, I think that's why it was a bit heavy handed.
interesting because you mentioned Brody McConnell Barker, the younger brother of Bryce, who got rocked by Braden Bowman same week in Guelph. And I wonder, just when you're talking about the caliber of player, is it because Braden Bowman is a high caliber player that there was not even a call, much less supplemental discipline for Braden Bowman from that hit?
Yeah, I think benefit of the doubt comes in there, right? And track record. And I mean, I didn't like the hit by Bowman, but there is a bit of a track record there. Braden Bowman's not a dirty player. He's the captain of the team. He's there for skill reasons. He's not out there in a predatory nature. Whereas I think the league looks at a player like Sawyer Boulton and just sees it for what it is. So this is a guy who knows his role. I'm not saying he does a bad job at that role, but sometimes crosses the line. And I think the league is going to be there to step in when that line that crosses is crossed, costs a skilled player some games and potentially his health. So that's the difference.
I should correct myself too. Bowman did get a penalty for it, right? He just didn't
Yes.
get any supplemental discipline. Yeah. And so just back to the Sawyer Bolton piece, I think you touched on something a moment ago, Dan, that to me is the key to all of this. It's third time offender here. So it was a hit to the head of Quentin Musty earlier in the season versus Sudbury. The quote unquote staged fight, which I still think was a bullshit call on both Jackson Stewart and Sawyer Bolton, to be honest with you. Owen Sound, London, a month or so ago, but that was the second suspension, a 3-game ban there. So it went from 2 with the hit on Musty to 3 with the quote unquote staged fight, and now 10 games. And can I go so far as to say, Dan, that I'm kind of impressed with the league offices on this, right? You kind of got the step up here, 2 games, 3 games, 10 games, get the message, and also the discipline was handed out very swiftly in this regard.
Yeah, the league's doing a much, much better job of that this year. And I'm with you 100%, Mike. Like you look at those names you just said, Quentin Musty, Bryce McConnell Barker. Those are 2 players fans pay to see. And I think the league's sending a pretty clear message here that if you're going to employ players and have the strategy to go after those guys, you got to know where the line's going to be or we're going to come down on you. And, at the end of the day, teams may still feel it's worthwhile to take those runs and take those shots and risk it to get those players out of the game. But that's not what any of the rest of us want to see. When I go to a game, I want to see Quentin Musty. I want to see Bryce McConnell Barker. So it's almost like the NFL erring on the side of being a little bit overprotective of quarterbacks, which ruffles some fans' feathers and say, well, that wasn't really a penalty out. But I'd rather see that than the opposite. So good on the league.
I'm going to plead innocence here. I swear this is the truth, but I do a weekly video called Fridays with Farwell just to kind of, talk about something in the league. If you haven't seen it on our YouTube channel, please check it out. The YouTube channel is the OHL podcast. But I had no idea that this particular hit, Sawyer Bolton on Bryce McConnell Barker, had stirred up such animosity between the Sioux and London. I just did my most recent video again. I promise innocently because I read the post game report in the Sioux Star and I kind of chuckled at some quotes in there. One from head coach John Dean of the Sioux Greyhounds, who said it was the London Knights' intention to come into the game and drag it into the gutter. And then Julian Fantino, a forward with the Greyhounds, saying, "Oh yeah, there will be a response when we play next in London." And look, I said this in the video. I'm not advocating frontier justice here. I don't want anybody to go out headhunting. Maybe the response is, they put up a crooked number the next time they play the London Knights. But what I liked about it and what I said in the video was that we got a little bit of a rivalry going on here. We got people not afraid to speak their mind in the newspaper after the game. The game's being dragged into the gutter. You bet we're going to respond for what he did to our guy. I like this sort of thing. I like a little bit of emotion in our games here. And so I posted the video just with that intention and then realized after the fact, because I'm getting it from both fan bases, like, whoa, okay, so I was just outside looking in. I liked a couple of the quotes. The two of you just go back and do what you've been doing. But from the outside, I'm kind of enjoying this just as a fan. Like, stir it up. Let's go.
It certainly ratchets up attention for the next and interest in the next meeting, right? And we see this all year. It's like there's some gamesmanship in the papers and with the quotes and emotion runs high after these games. Players say things, coaches say things, then maybe a day or two later they regret that it was maybe a little more inflammatory than they intended. These things happen, but you're right. At the bottom line is it does create intrigue, and you want to see both teams fly in the next game, and ultimately that's what you're going to see. You're going to want to see teams beating each other on the score sheet. Just makes for better hockey.
It's absolutely nothing compared to what we're going to be seeing post-Christmas, pre-January 10th trade deadline, but there were a few deals this week, probably chief among them, Dan. The Kitchener Rangers seem to have cleared up their overage situation, trading away defenseman Roman Schmidt to the Kingston Frontenacs for a second and a third round pick. What do you make of the deal?
Yeah, another one, Mike. I like how this year it's kind of stunning me how a lot of these deals are actually seem pretty fair. I mean, Kitchener obviously had the overager issue. They with Mitchell Martin on the shelf, they were able to dress the other three, Motu, Sop, and Schmidt for now. But that deadline was quickly approaching. I think you heard Mike McKenzie's comments after the trade saying that he was worried about running out of runway and having to give the player away or waive him, and that's not good value for players of that ilk. So presumably may have looked for offers on more than one of them and taken the best one. My hunch is that had committed to Martin, Sop, and Motu at the start of the year, and when Schmidt unexpectedly showed up, said, "Okay, the right thing to do is let's find him a good spot." Kingston had a situation where they had a trade request from Thomas Budnick, wanted to play in Guelph, had to move him. Suddenly, a hole in their roster for a Kingston team that's ratcheting up, starting to ramp up, and looking like this might be their year if they can kind of get things together. So they needed to plug that hole quickly. A second, a third, certainly fair for a player like Schmidt who can log huge minutes in virtually any role, but especially in that shutdown role. So yeah, I think deal's fair both ways.
I like the move by Corey Cooper up in Kingston, just for the record, because you basically end up with an extra third round pick because Budnick goes to Guelph for a second and two thirds. You give the second and third, or a second and third, to Kitchener for Roman Schmidt. So you keep your defense intact. You add a third round pick to your own roster. And yes, Dan, from the Kitchener Rangers side of things, I think Mike McKenzie does well extracting some value from a player that he was going to have to move, maybe not Roman Schmidt specifically, but he had four overagers on his team. And obviously, we know post January the 9th, you can't carry all four. So I think he extracted some decent value out of an asset that everybody knew he had to move. And the secondary part of this, from the Kitchener perspective, that I find rather intriguing is that Mitch Martin has missed the past 18 games with a lower body injury. It's not even skating yet as we head into the Christmas break. And a lot of people were wondering, boy, oh boy, was this injury, because it's been listed as week to week for quite some time. Like, how bad is it? And is Mitch Martin ever going to be back on the ice? I guess we know now, or we can at least assume with Roman Schmidt gone, there is an expectation that Mitch Martin will very much be a part of this Rangers team in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and I think Josh Brown, the Waterloo Region record reporter, stated recently that he's hearing Mitchell Martin is going to start skating sometime around the trade deadline. Probably need a few weeks to get back to game shape, but sometime in that stretch run, I suppose he'll return. But they must be obviously pretty confident that he's going to get back and be able to play for them to move Schmidt. And you look at a player like Mitchell Martin and just fits that roster like a glove. So I have no issue with Mike McKenzie deciding they want to stick with Mitchell Martin. We saw what an absolute beast he was in the playoffs last year. Just a load to handle, can skate, can score, can hit. Adds absolutely everything you need to make a run in the playoffs. So I don't think it's a bad move if they've got some reasonable medical reports on him.
One more little move that was made. Reed Gee is no longer a member of the Flint Firebirds. He comes over to Mississauga in exchange for, along with a 12th round pick, in exchange for a third, an eighth, and 11th that Saga sends back Flint's way. Again, this is going to get a whole heck of a lot more interesting post Christmas, but this kind of ties off some loose ends, or puts a bow on trades, if you will, as we head into the holiday season. Okay, we still got lots to talk about because, look, Dan talked me into one of his usually cockamamie ideas. Oh yeah, let's do this before the holiday break. We should give out some mid-season awards. So we'll do that. We'll acknowledge a couple of milestones, and of course, we still have our prospects of the week, all still coming on this episode of the OHL podcast. Before we get to that cockamamie idea of yours, Mahar, let's acknowledge a couple of milestones here. Chief among them, of course, Chris Lazary is now the winningest coach in Saginaw Spirit franchise history. Congratulations. Win number 155. It comes in 274 games, and it gives Laz one more win than former Spirit head coach Todd Watson.
Yeah, well, a big congratulations to Chris Lazary. We know he's just gonna be adding to that tally as we go forward here. Plenty more this year to come, and presumably in the future too. So, pretty neat to be in the record books in any regard, but we know he's going to set his name apart in the Saginaw Spirit books, and if he stays long enough in the league, because his track record is pretty darn good in Saginaw. So congratulations to him, and many more to come.
Why would you say such a thing if he stays long enough in the league, Dan? I'm curious.
Well, I'm just saying there's a lot of pro jobs available, and if you're looking to fill a pro job, I would think Chris Lazary has to be on your list, wouldn't he?
It's funny because it doesn't take a genius to use Google and just start looking back. And when I did, it's a pretty damned impressive coaching resume for Chris Lazary, going back into his days even before in the Ontario Hockey League, even in the days before the Greater Ontario Junior Hockey League in the Junior B Loop, where he won a Cherry Cup with the Waterloo Siskins and took them to the semis of the Sutherland Cup, or the Southey as they call it. You can look back at all of the other chapters or parts of that resume for Chris Lazary, but one that stands out to me, connected to what you just said, Dan, is when he left Sarnia, where he was an assistant coach. It was a tough decision for him. He's got a young family, and they decided to make the move. And so it just goes to show, for sure, he's trying to take the next step in his professional career that will get him to that ultimate goal. But 155 wins with the Saginaw Spirit, dare I say, certainly in this day and age where we know that the league, the Ontario Hockey League, is a stepping stone or a development league for coaches as much as it is for players and others, that's going to be a really tough mark for somebody to come along and break. And he's at 155 now. He's only going to be adding to that total as this season goes on, and who knows what beyond this, of course, as the Saginaw Spirit hosts the Memorial Cup. Is he going to be like Pete DeBoer, hosted a Memorial Cup in 08 and then gone to the pros? I guess we'll see. But I don't think this is the last stop in Chris Lazary's coaching career. And just one more quick note. I'm not sure I've ever shared it before, but the story's been out there from enough people that it's either a really cool urban legend or it's true. And I lean towards the latter in it being true. The man that Chris Lazary just passed, Todd Watson, who had 154 wins as the Saginaw Spirit head coach, famously one weekend invited the other members of his coaching staff to come to the house and help him put in a pool. And the guys were like, "What, you need like the fencing or the deck around the pool, or like an above ground pool?" He's like, "No, like we're gonna like dig the hole and put a pool in my backyard." I'm not making any of this up. I swear this is the story that's out there, that he thought that over the course of a weekend, I mean, if you really applied yourself and had enough guys with enough shovels, you could effectively dig your own in-ground backyard pool. True story about Todd Watson.
And this is why we have suspensions when you abuse power imbalance. So no, but he
Do you
probably
imagine that? That's all my assistants go, dig, dig.
and this is why you just call it team building, Farwell, and you're all good.
One of the other milestones we want to touch on, Jorian Donovan passes Ben Gleason for most goals by a defenseman in Bulldogs franchise history, 23 of them now for Donovan. And hey, the timing, though, is what stands out to me. Donovan gets cut from Team Canada, comes back, joins Brantford, establishes the franchise mark for goals as a defenseman. And one more note on that, not really a milestone, but Michael Bushinger also cut, goes back to Guelph, scores the teddy bear goal for the Storm in a victory for them on the weekend as well. So just thought we'd note those guys both cut from Team Canada, but getting right back in and making contributions with their club teams.
Yeah, and good on them too, because I think both of them probably recognized that it was an honor just being invited. Not saying they went there thinking they were going to be cut, but they knew it was both were a bit of a long shot, and to go get that experience, then come back with that confidence boost, and you love to see them hit the ground running and not sulk. So good on them.
All right, let's get to this cockamamie idea that you had. Like I should just block you on text or something like that. We'll set a time to sit down and record our podcast, and I won't pay any attention to your nonsense during the week. But you sucked me in, because who doesn't want to do this as you head into the holiday break? So for some teams like the Kitchener Rangers, I think they're the only team that's actually reached 34 games now, exactly half the season. But this is the unofficial halfway point. So Dan Mahar had the brilliant idea we should hand out some mid-season hardware. So we're going to go goaltender, defenseman, rookie, MVP, and coach of the half season. And because it was your dumb idea, Mahar, you can go first. Let's start from the net out. Who's your goaltender of the half year?
Okay, first of all, it's not dumb, it's cockamamie. And second of all, I got to give you credit. That impression you did of me earlier on, that was spot on. So I'll give you that. Okay, so my goalie of the half year, all these were tough calls, but I'm just gonna say that I landed on Braden Gillespie in Guelph, and couple reasons. Obviously, his numbers are right there: 278 GAA, 906 save percentage, 15 wins, everything right near the top of the league. But I think the fact that he has lifted a Guelph Storm team that's been short, he's come out of nowhere to be the key factor in a bunch of those victories, really kept that team in the hunt. So if they get bolstered in the second half, who knows what's going to happen. So I thought there was 4 or 5 goalies in the running for this, but my guy for the half year is Braden Gillespie. Who you got?
And just quickly, because I'm with you with what you said, Dan. And if you think cockamamie sounds better than dumb, I'll keep saying cockamamie all day long. So, but this was a difficult thing, way harder than I thought it would be, which is why I'm annoyed with you for making me go through the exercise. Naturally, Braden Gillespie was on my radar too. And think about load management here too. Like, this guy has been playing virtually every game for the Storm and just showing up and responding. And it makes me think quickly. And some good reporting from Greg Cowan again. That's his second shout out on this podcast, but with the Owen Sound Sun Times, because he asked Darren Rumble about that with regard to Carter George, who's just carrying the mail for the attack. But Rumble's response is, listen, like, these are young goaltenders. They're in good shape, and we got to ride the hot hand. That's absolutely what Chad Wiseman has been doing in Guelph. Gillespie has responded in spades for the very reasons that you talked about. Backstopping a team that, would be struggling certainly without him, putting up some sparkling numbers. I'm going just down the road from Guelph, and call me a homer if you want. But to me, Jackson Parsons is the guy, and the numbers speak for itself. And I think what makes it, I know he's 19 years old. I know. But remember, this is his first year as a starter. It's his first full year because of the injuries he has battled so far. This guy's been a great teammate as a backup, and even when he's injured, he's still got this goofy smile on his face all the time around the rink. And you look at what he's doing this year, and it's incredible. You talked about Gillespie's 278. Well, Parsons has got him one better. His 277 goals against is tops in the league. His 906 save percentage is second in the league. He's first in wins with 17. He's first in shutouts with 4. For me, Jackson Parsons is the goaltender of the half year.
Yeah, hard to argue that. And like you said, you look at those numbers and they're so comparable. Slightly different contexts, but yeah, I didn't think you could go wrong with either of those guys, and probably 1 or 2 more.
I might have had an even harder time on D. Where did you land?
So this one was really tough. So I got to preface this, Farrell, by saying that I have fought to not be a homer here, because a lot of these personal individual stats and records this year are, I got to be honest, are pointing towards Kitchener for a lot of reasons. And you can just look at any neutral cursory look at the OHL website and you'll see that. Having said that, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna temper my homerism on this one, and I'm gonna go with Zane Parekh, just based on everything he's doing there in Saginaw. I mean, just such an exciting, entertaining player to watch, putting up the offense as you'd expect from a draft eligible player, running that power play, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was tough. I thought there was a few in this category I could have gone with, but I'm going to go with Parekh. Who you got?
So I'm doing the same thing, and boy, did I look long and hard at Matt Andonovski, because it's so hard to not like what this guy is doing so quietly. And what is he, a plus 36 or some redonkulous number halfway through the season? And of course, how do you ignore a Hunter Brustevich and what he's been doing? And what a pairing they end up making for the Rangers. But that's absolutely a bias, although I think that I would argue picking either one of those guys as the D of the half year, and we can have a beer about it or an eggnog over Christmas, and we'll go and go and go about it, because you can make a case for either of those guys. But I'm also going to try to not be too much of a homer, especially after taking Parsons as the goalie of the half year. And sure, I took a look at Zane Parekh, but then I just looked away, because to me, he's just doing what we all expected
Yeah.
him to do, right? No offense, Zane, you're a
Yeah.
great player. And I went up north to Sault Ste. Marie and picked out Artu Karki, 16 goals already for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. And this guy is just so dangerous. He's such a weapon for you on the back end. And sure, maybe you could argue, well, yeah, he is an NHL prospect already with Vegas, so you expect this, but boy, oh boy, has he impressed the heck out of me. So I went Karki as my defenseman of the half year.
Yeah, he was on my and each one of these categories had 3 or 4 honorable mentions. And how many of Karki's goals have come from the middle of the left faceoff circle on the power play? Like this seems to be his spot. But yeah, what an impact he's had on Sault Ste. Marie. So obviously no qualms with that pick whatsoever.
Yeah, a little Ovechkin-esque, isn't it, when you see him do that? I don't like comparables at all, but it gives you the idea of where he's setting up on the ice to let those shots go. Okay, this one also, I know we're going to be different on it. I took my guy for a very specific reason, but who did you go with for a rookie?
Okay, rookie. I had a couple qualifiers again. I really wanted to go with a 2007 born player, and it's no offense to all the slightly older rookies. They're equally as important to this league as well. But I just think to do it at 16 is so unbelievably impressive. And I had a list here of 4 or 5 guys that I was having trouble picking, and I ultimately landed on the goaltender, Mike. I went with Jack Ivankovic. The reason being 10 games, 5-2 record. Numbers are kind of off the chart. 914 save percentage, 280 goals against. This kid's 16, Mike. And to put up those numbers, I just look, numbers bordering on elite for the league, not for rookies, in a class by himself for rookie goaltenders. I know we have a goalie category, so I felt bad picking a second goalie, but I just couldn't ignore those numbers. So I'm going with Ivan Kovic. Who you got?
I love the pick. And of course, Ryerson Leanders was in my mind as I looked at the goalie of the half year. What an embarrassment of riches they have right now in Mississauga. I'll just add this to what you just said about young Jack Ivankovic. Settle down, Jack. We've got 3 more years at least to talk about you on this podcast and in this league. But that's an excellent selection. And I confess, to going with a 17-year-old. I've got an '06 on mine, but again, for very specific reason, I went with Cole Davis as my rookie of the year. I know he's a year older. He had 5 games in the O last year, but what I like about what Cole Davis is doing right now, tied for third in rookie points with 20, is that he's doing it for the Windsor Spitfires. And no disrespect, Windsor, but how tough must it be to be on your second coach to go through the first 20 odd games with just 4 wins? This team loses 8 games in a row. They're struggling mightily. And yet, this guy in his first full year in the league without a whole lot of support around him. Again, I'm not trying to whiz on the players that are there, but I mean, even Alex Christopoulos was out for an extended period, right? Coming back from injury. So for those reasons, I took a deeper dive and looked at Cole Davis and I said, you know what, kid, considering the adversity you're facing, I'm giving you the nod as the rookie of the half year.
No, a great call. I love all the reasons you just described. He's often the engine. He and Liam Greentree, 2 draft eligibles that are driving the train there in a difficult year. So great pick. But what talk about embarrassment of riches, Mike, with the league this year. I mean, I could have made a compelling case for Jake O'Brien and Hamilton, Travis Hayes and the Sioux, even Tanner Lamb and Kitchener. I mean, there's a lot of rookies here that are just making a compelling case to say they were the best rookie in the first half of this year. So I think fans of this league have something to look forward to.
Really enjoyed Hayes in a live viewing this past weekend, and that's why I tried to stay away. I thought there's a recency bias sneaking in here, but yeah, Hayes is also excellent and will be for years to come. Okay, this next one gave me a little bit of a fit as well, but maybe I'll start this way. Why did you not take Carson Rakoff? Because it's hard not to as your MVP.
Okay, so I did.
Okay, good. Well, all this homerism stuff, I already
I
took Parsons as the goalie, so fair
yeah,
enough.
I did, and the reason being, this is why I kind of made my little excuse for the homerism, because as I went through these categories, I kept asking myself, "Is this being homers?" But now, how can you ignore the CHL goal leader, league point leader, playing all situations? Just take it, like, he's got 31 goals in mid-December, for crying out loud. And you look at all the other comparables in this league. Like, I really struggled here because I looked at Porter Martone, I looked at Nick Lardis, I look at some of these guys that are just having phenomenal years, and tried to make the case. And in every situation, I just couldn't make the case that they've actually been better than Carson Rakoff. And I thought, forget it. I'm just going to do what I need to do here. And Carson Rakoff is my first half MVP.
Yeah,
Who's
and
who you got?
not Carson Rakoff, but not because he doesn't deserve it, as you well know, for the reasons you just outlined, Dan. And I'll just say again, I mean, I feel like I'm being apologetic, but honestly, we've talked about this on the podcast already in this first half year. The Carson Rakoff that we are seeing this year, and obviously we see every Kitchener game, is a full 180 from the Carson Rakoff we saw in the first 2 years. He's doing so many more of the little things right. He's playing in all those situations, as you said, Dan. He's playing so well in his own end, and I think there's a reason. These are all factors, I'll bet, along with the pure scoring ability that helped him make Team Canada this year. So again, Rakoff, settle down. You got enough accolades. You're not getting one more from me on this podcast. And I started thinking about this as, the age-old argument when it comes to MVP. Is it the best player in the league? Is it the most valuable to their team? And so I started taking a good hard look at the Peterborough Petes, and boy, oh boy, did I want to dive in there and pick, because the Pete's a nice surprise in the Eastern Conference this year. Then I thought about another team in the East that is probably playing a year ahead of its anticipated pace coming in, and then I found my way to Luke Misa. He opens the season with a 4-point night. He has since had a 5-point game, 12 multi-point games already this season, and he's currently riding an 8-game point streak. So for me, the MVP of the first half of the season is not Michael, but Luke Misa in Mississauga.
Well, I kudos to you, because I did not see that coming. And again, a great pick. I mean, Luke Misa, again, a draft eligible player. We're not talking about a guy that's out of the league after this year. So what a phenomenal amount of young talent we have in this league. And yeah, I can't argue with that pick. Did
All
not
right.
did not guess that one from you, but cannot argue.
I have a feeling. I mean, there's only one way to go for the coach of the half year, right? We are going to be in unanimity on this. Dan Mahar, who you got?
There was no other choice here. I mean, I had a bunch of honorable mentions, don't get me wrong, but it's got to be UC Hocus. I
Of
mean,
course it does.
there's no argument otherwise when you take a team that everyone predicted to be out of the playoffs, and he's in first in the league at this point, has been dealing with some injuries, but et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But just the style of play. And of course you want to give the sort of consolation shout out to Kurzakos and Flynn on that bench as well, because I believe these staffs are staffs. It's not just the head coach, but Utsia Hokus is, for me, there wasn't a whole lot of debate on this one.
I think you're spot on when you talk about the coaching staff. I've interrupted a meeting or two pregame just to poke my head into the coach's office, and I see how these guys work together. But I don't know how many different ways you can look at this Rangers team compared to last Rangers team. They've got 24 wins already this season at the midway point. They only had 33 wins all of last year. The Rangers have 50 points already this season at the halfway point. They only had 72 points a year ago. I mean, it just goes on and on. And it's impossible in my mind to argue that the biggest difference here is how they are being coached. They've bent but not broken on a number of occasions, back-to-back losses, but never a 3-game skid. Every time there seems to be a challenge put in front of them, the team seems to meet the challenge, and I think that starts at the top. So without question in my mind, UC Hocus is the coach of the half year for sure.
Yeah, and again, this is take nothing away from some pretty incredible years. Shout out to John Dean, James Richmond. A couple of these other guys are just always good and getting a phenomenal amount out of their teams. Both Sioux and Mississauga, as you referenced, probably a year early too, and that speaks largely to coaching. So it wasn't that there weren't other worthy candidates, but I just you can't not give it to UC Hocus at this stage.
Yeah, and I might throw in, although their teams have started to slide kind of in the direction we thought, but Rob Wilson in Peterborough, Al Latang in Sarnia, who's going to be coaching the World Junior squad, so you'll see him over Christmas. But anyway, lots out there. But for me and for both of us, for obvious reasons, I think if we put up a poll, everybody would have to make that choice because of the way the first half of the season has gone. All right, as far as cockamamie ideas go, Dan, I think that went okay. I mean, again, let us know. OHL podcast at Rogers.com. Throw in your own suggestions or tell us how bad the idea was. I don't know. Was it dumb? Was it cockamamie? Could have been both. We don't know. All right, let's get into last order of business before we take a break for the holidays. And that is, of course, our weekly prospect of the week, one for each of us. Who are you bringing to the show?
I changed my mind 3 times this week, Mike. So that tells you how this week's going. I ultimately landed on my boy Merrick Van Acker in Brantford. Love his game. I've loved his game all year. The aggressive forecheck, the speed. He's got good size. Starting to put up some great numbers. We just saw a 4-pointer from him, dragged his team back into the fight to squeeze a point out of their visit to Kingston in a game that looked like they had lost. Bit of a bull in a china shop in that one, almost nearing the point of game pace right now, but love everything he does on the ice aside from just scoring. So I had Merrick Van Acker. Who you got?
Excellent choice. Love me some Merrick Van Acker, and great reference to the game that was today as we're recording this at the end of the Oshawa Peterborough, by the way, best rivalry in the Ontario Hockey League. That game earlier tonight, it's a Sunday. It's the last game that was played before the break. And we just wanted to let the game finish. And I had forgot to make the note because I watched that Kingston Brantford game earlier today. Van Acker almost won it in regulation, but he rang it off the post. The point I wanted to make, though, and I feel just awful, but they still haven't gotten the memo in Kingston, eh? Like that there is a junior hockey team there. Oh my goodness, just a dreadful crowd at the Leon Center. Why?
Right. It was so depressing to see that, Mike, because they're a good I don't know if you're not paying attention, folks, but that team has been a good hockey team for a while now, last few weeks. They've gotten it together. They're going, they're getting healthy. Go support that team. It's a great venue too.
Oh, it's an incredible venue. One of the best we've got in the league. I love the city. I've got a real soft spot for Kingston. I just think it's a terrific city. And heck, I was in Barrie on Saturday night. That team is not doing well right now. They're really struggling of late. And in all honesty, I thought the building was a little bit quiet for the crowd that was there. It got into it as the team did, and they forced overtime against Kitchener too. But there were 3,500 plus at the Sadlin Arena. Like, what the hell? Kingston. It was really sad to see because that was a good hockey game earlier today, and apparently you, me, and a couple of our good friends in Kingston are the only ones that saw it.
What a shame.
It is a shame. All right, so you got Van Acker. I and it worked out well for me. Have a guy that made I think me feel even better about my choice as I watched him play in that last game before we called it a Christmas break, and that is Luca Morelli of the Oshawa Generals, who picked up two more assists in the 5-1 win over Peterborough, was a +3 in the game. So you go back over the past 4 games, including the one that just finished, he's got himself 6 assists and he's a +9 in the past 4 games. And so for me, Luca Morelli is my prospect of the week.
Great choice. I love the Morellis, even though I don't know how many times I've slipped and called them the Masellis, but we know who's the boss around here, right? So
Nicely done, Tony.
thank you.
Nicely
Thank
done.
you.
And anybody who gets that reference, bonus points from Mona. And we'll just leave it right there. The holidays are upon us, Dan. What's a Mahar family tradition?
I don't know if there is a big family tradition. It'll be the usual family dinner, and then it'll be a whole bunch of hockey, both coaching in the rinks and watching the World Juniors. But how about you?
Are you a Christmas Eve or a Christmas morning presents guy?
Christmas morning / afternoon. Yeah, you?
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm a stickler that way. It's got to be Christmas morning. Sometimes I'm getting softer in my old age, so maybe we'll sneak one in on Christmas Eve. I'm all about the food for sure. The only problem for me is that I'm going to be surrounded by fans of my least favorite NHL team, which is your favorite NHL team. I don't know how this happened to me, but fortunately, the Leafs are well ahead of that team from Quebec in the standings. So I should be in pretty good position this holiday season. So
Sounds like I need an invite to your house, Farwell,
not
because
happening. This is as close as we need to get, Dansky. This is as close as we need to get. All right. We will be back in the first week of January. Dan and I are just trying to figure out because the New Year's Day is the Monday. So we'll figure it out. But sometime that week of January the 1st, we'll get back with our next episode, get you set for the trade deadline. We'll have some obviously World Juniors to talk about because we're all going to be enjoying that over Christmas. So thank you very much for sticking with us through another half season. We're having tons of fun. You know what, Dan, I don't think I even shared this with you yet. So I'll just share it live on the podcast. 4,000 downloads this month. We have set a new OHL podcast record for monthly downloads. So I think they're only here for you. There's no question about that. But hey, thank you for coming along on the ride. That makes it feel like, they're out there. They're listening. They're really listening.
yeah, I can only echo that, Mike. Thank you so much to everyone that's finding value in this and following us. We really appreciate it. And I've got plenty more cockamamie where that came from. So
Can't wait. We'll be back in the first week of January. Give us a like, subscribe, tell a friend, send an email anytime. OHLpodcast@rogers.com. He's Dan Mahar. I'm Mike Farwell. Merry Christmas. We're back in the first week of January on the OHL podcast.